I'm consumer investigator Dale Cardwell, and this is consumer news we can use. So, when is a crack just a crack? Or how can you know if it's really a sign of a major problem with your home's foundation? Joining us today is Jay Eastland, the owner of TrustDALE Certified Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Jay, how are you?
Hey Dale, how are you?
I'm fantastic. So, when anyone's in the market to buy a home, we all know that it's location, location, location. But perhaps the most important thing they need to consider after location is the foundation of their home. So, if we're buying an older home, there are going to be some cracks in the foundation around the home. But as you're going to explain, there are some cracks that are just cosmetic, and then there are cracks that you need to worry about. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, that's right, Dale. Just because you have a crack doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a catastrophic problem. The cracks that typically indicate structural movement tend to protrude at a 45-degree angle from doors, windows, or cased openings. Um, Cracks that go straight up and down and kind of follow a distinct line are typically separations in sheetrock joints, which again is not always indicative of some structural movement. But those diagonal cracks let you know that there is something going on that needs to be addressed.
So I see cracks in like sheetrock, and you've just explained how I know those are problematic. What about cracks on foundation slabs or beams? How do I judge the severity of those?
Yeah, so every piece of concrete that's poured cracks, and they're referred to as shrink cracks. So as the concrete cures, it shrinks and you develop some cracking. And those are all very natural. They typically occur every 10 to 20 feet, and they're typically straight. But again, when you get cracks that protrude off of an opening is a natural weak point in the foundation. So when we have foundation movement, it tends to show up at that already occurred weak place and manifest as a diagonal crack. So um, oftentimes we see poured wall foundations. They're seams that are created from the panels that they use to form the wall, and a little crack in those seams are not necessarily a problem. It's cracks that get bigger than an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch, and that aren't directly in those seams that indicate some structural movement and are the cracks that we need to be concerned about.
So, Jay, you've actually been to my home and you've explained this to me in person. So, if I've got those little, very narrow cracks in my cinder blocks that look like this, that's not really a problem, right?
Yeah, so you're always going to have some fine cracking in joints, and that's not necessarily a problem. With cinder block walls, the big thing that folks need to be on the lookout for is horizontal cracking and stair stepping cracking. And kind of the textbook way that it looks is you have a horizontal crack typically halfway to a third of the way down from the top, and those cracks run to a corner, and then they typically turn into stair step cracks when they get to the corner. And what that tells you is that that block wall is bowing, and the bowing is what causes that horizontal crack. And then when you get to the corners, those corners act as supports, and that bow transfers to a stair step crack in each corner. Those are the ones that are serious and need to be addressed.
Got it.
And the same thing kind of holds true on the outside of your house. If you've got a brick home and you've got some real fine hairline cracks in the brick joints, those are not things to be concerned about. If you've got cracks that are wider than an eighth to a quarter of an inch that come from those windows, doors that we talked about earlier, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's indicative of structural movement, and that's when you know that something needs to be done to stop that movement.
Jay, are bowed walls always a problem?
Bowed walls are always a problem. When you see that horizontal crack that we talked about earlier, What that tells you is that the wall is in failure. Now, I've been in this business for almost 30 years. And years ago, we used to tell people, if you can't stick 2/4 in that crack, then don't worry about it. Well, I know you were here in '09, Dale, when we had that torrential rain. We had 17 block foundation walls collapse after that rain. And many of those had that slight hairline crack. So while there are some cracks that you can kind of take a monitoring approach, that horizontal crack in a concrete block wall needs to be addressed, because it can go from that slight horizontal crack to catastrophic relatively quickly. It's one of the few things that can actually move that quickly. So yeah, if you've got a horizontal crack in a block wall, it needs to be addressed.
This is why we call it consumer news we can use. Jay, how do folks get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia?
So you can get us on the web at esogrepair.com, or you can get us in the office at 678 ESOG now. I didn't sing that, Dale, which I know you and all the viewers will appreciate.
Very much so. Jay Eastland, Engineered Solutions of Georgia, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dale.
And we'll see you next time on Consumer News We Can Use.